I never thought turning 40 would feel like stepping onto a battlefield dressed in party clothes. My name is Christine Hayes, and for as long as I could remember, I had been the responsible one. The stabilizer of my family, the keeper of peace, and, unbeknownst to most, the silent financier of my younger brother's outrageous lifestyle. This year, I wanted my birthday to be different. No passive-aggressive comments, no underhanded jabs, no invisible scoreboard keeping track of my sacrifices. I envisioned a night bathed in laughter, surrounded by people who, at the very least, claimed to love me. Instead, what I got was humiliation served with a smile. The backyard was beautifully decorated. Twinkling lights hung like stars above our heads, casting soft, romantic glows over the patio. The table was filled with food I had carefully chosen, trying to satisfy every picky palate in my family. My favorite jazz records played softly in the background, a subtle nod to my own taste, which had always been ridiculed by Justin, my younger brother. Friends mingled, kids ran around, and the air was thick with the kind of laughter I wanted to be part of, not the target of. I stood near the cake, a delicate chocolate masterpiece adorned with 40 flickering candles. I had spent hours making it perfect, as though the cake itself could somehow ward off disaster. My hands trembled slightly, not from nerves, but from the quiet fury I already felt brewing in my chest. Justin Hayes, my younger brother by 8 years, sauntered up. That familiar smirk that I had hated since childhood stretched across his face. He wore a crisp blazer over a designer shirt, his Porsche parked in the driveway gleaming under the fairy lights, a symbol of everything I had sacrificed to fund his dreams. Behind him, his entourage, Derek Walsh, his so-called best friend, and a few other friends I barely knew, stood laughing, whispering, snickering, as though they were about to witness a scene from a sitcom. "You've done a lot for this family, Christine," Justin said, his tone sugary sweet, the kind that hides knives. "But tonight, you'll see something different." I forced a smile, tightening my grip on the envelope he handed me. Sleek, black, and expensive-looking, the envelope felt heavy in my hands, almost like it carried the weight of every insult, every slight, every invisible tally of my years of sacrifice. "Open it, Christine," he said, leaning back with his arms crossed, a smirk curling his lips. I tore the envelope open, my heart quietly daring hope to sneak in. Maybe it was a note of appreciation. A card from someone who finally recognized my efforts. Maybe, just maybe, tonight would be the night my family saw me. I was wrong. The words hit me like a punch straight to the chest. Bold, cruel, and dripping with malice. "You don't belong to this family." The backyard erupted in laughter. Loud, raucous, unrelenting. Derek laughed like a hyena. My mother, my own mother, chuckled as if she had just witnessed the punchline of the year. Some of my father's old friends gasped, but the damage was done. I stood frozen, staring at the card in disbelief, the words searing into my mind like molten metal. Humiliation burned hotter than any candle flame. My cheeks flushed, my chest tightened, and for a moment, I couldn't breathe. Years of quietly funding Justin's tech startup, his Porsche, his so-called entrepreneurial dreams, all of it boiled down to this single act of public cruelty. My mother's favoritism, his friends' mockery, the countless times I had swallowed my pride for the sake of family harmony. Everything suddenly seemed like a lie. I forced myself to smile. I had learned long ago that anger looked better when it was carefully hidden. "Thank you for the card," I said softly, my voice calm but cold, like glass sliding over ice. "It's unforgettable." Justin grinned, utterly satisfied, as if he had won a championship I didn't know I was playing. The crowd continued their laughter, some politely stopping to sip drinks, others leaning in to watch my reaction. I could feel the weight of their eyes, the unspoken judgment, the unearned glee at my expense. But inside me, something shifted. Humiliation for once didn't break me. It ignited me. Every sneer, every sarcastic comment over the years, every time I had been invisible while Justin received praise for breathing, fueled a new fire inside me. This wasn't the end. Far from it. This was a declaration, a challenge. They thought they could break me in a single night, with a single cruel sentence. They had no idea what was coming. As I blew out the 40 candles, I closed my eyes and made a promise, not to them, not for anyone's approval, but for myself. I would reclaim my dignity, my power, and my family. I would show them that Christine Hayes was not a punchline. Christine Hayes was a force. And Justin? He would learn, sooner or later, that every empire built on someone else's labor is fragile. The evening carried on, a blur of chatter, laughter, and clinking glasses. Justin continued his charade, sipping champagne with Derek, basking in the attention. I watched, quiet, analyzing. Every joke, every slip, every arrogance-filled comment became a thread in a tapestry I was beginning to weave, a tapestry of control, strategy, and revenge. By the time the guests left, I had already begun planning my next moves. A lawyer friend quietly texted me a reminder about the trust fund. I reviewed financial statements on my phone, noting discrepancies Justin had assumed I'd ignore. I had spent decades being the responsible one, the invisible caretaker. Now, I would be visible, calculated, strategic. Justin and Derek believed the game was theirs to win. My mother believed her favorite son would always be untouchable. And I? I smiled at the thought of their eventual shock. This birthday, meant to humiliate me, had done the opposite. It had awakened something deep and undeniable, a desire to reclaim, to correct, and to rise above. 40 candles blown out, one envelope of cruel words, countless years of sacrifice, and a fire that would not be extinguished. Christine Hayes was no longer just the caretaker. She was about to become the storm. They say family is everything. Loyalty, love, trust, these are the words whispered in every heartwarming greeting card, plastered on every social media post about Sunday dinners. But family can also be a battlefield. I should know. I had spent the better part of my adult life funding my younger brother Justin's lifestyle, keeping our family afloat financially, and sacrificing my own desires so they could live as if nothing else mattered. Justin was 30, the so-called golden child of the Hayes family. Charming, charismatic, and utterly selfish. From the outside, he had it all: a Porsche, a sleek tech startup, an apartment that looked like it belonged in a magazine. And every bit of it was underwritten by me. Not out of malice, but out of a twisted sense of responsibility I had inherited the day Dad passed. Dad's death had left more than just grief. It had left us with a hefty inheritance. A trust fund meant to secure the family's future. And by some unspoken agreement, I became its caretaker. Every dollar had passed through my hands, carefully allocated to keep Justin's dreams alive, our mother comfortable, and to ensure that the family facade didn't crumble. At first, it wasn't so bad. Justin would call me, asking for small loans to start new projects. I would send the money, thinking it would be invested responsibly. But small projects became bigger projects. A Porsche here, a weekend in Miami there, a promising startup idea funded entirely by me. Derek Walsh, his best friend, was always in tow, egging him on, pushing him further into indulgence. Dinner parties became torture. Justin, with his perfect smile and designer clothes, would lean back, swirling his drink, tossing subtle jabs about my lifestyle. Christine, still reading those dusty books? Jazz again? How avant-garde. His friends, especially Derek, would laugh harder than anyone else, as if my existence was a running joke. And my mother, Patricia Hayes, was no help. She had always favored Justin, the baby of the family, praising his every move while ignoring my sacrifices. "He's just spirited, Christine. she would say whenever I protested his cruelty. That word, spirited, had become the family code for excuse, a shield to justify Justin's arrogance. And for me, responsibility became invisibility, a silent penalty I endured because I loved them. I watched Karen, my younger sister, play the side of peacemaker, but even she had her secrets. She and Justin were close, always sharing inside jokes, texting late at night, laughing at things I would never understand. She had even sunk $50,000 into Derek's ventures without telling me, money that came from the trust fund I managed. It was like the three of them were in a private club, a circle I had been unknowingly funding and now being excluded from. I would lie awake at night, thinking about every sacrifice, every invisible hour spent managing accounts, handling taxes, ensuring the bills were paid, that no one went without. The irony? My career as a software developer, the one thing I had built for myself, became the backbone of our family's lifestyle. Every bonus, every side project, every coding contract, all funneled into keeping Justin's image alive. And all he did was treat it like it was owed to him. I remember one particular dinner at my own house. Justin walked in late, as usual, his hair perfectly coiffed, his Porsche keys dangling from his pocket. He plopped into the living room, smirking, and immediately began dissecting my home. "Nice bookshelf, Christine. Didn't know you still read paperbacks. Isn't that quaint?" Derek laughed like a man possessed. My mother barely looked up from her wine, a faint smile tugging at her lips, as if she had been expecting this moment for years. I had smiled that night, a practiced, tight smile. Anger simmered beneath the surface, but I swallowed it. I had to, because losing control would have meant chaos, and I had spent my entire adult life ensuring there was order, even if it meant being invisible. And yet, despite all of this, I never stopped funding him. I never stopped believing that family loyalty meant more than humiliation. Each month, Justin would send me vague business plans, progress reports with graphs and charts, and I would nod along, approving the funds. Every time I secretly hoped he would see the effort, the care, the sleepless nights behind those transactions. He never did. He never would. It wasn't just about money, though. It was about control, power, and respect. The kind that was only granted through fear, charm, or dominance, not gratitude. Justin knew he could push boundaries because he had seen how far I would bend. And my mother? She empowered him with her favoritism, rewarding his arrogance with smiles and praise, while I quietly cleaned up the mess. But the truth, the uncomfortable, searing truth, was this. I had been the golden ATM for far too long. Every laugh at my expense, every snide remark, every insult disguised as humor, they had built a mountain of resentment within me. And that mountain, until now, had been silent, patient, waiting. I began seeing patterns. Justin's dependence on me wasn't just financial, it was emotional leverage. He thrived on the comfort of my patience and the invisibility of my sacrifices. Derek, his enabler, fueled the fire, making him feel untouchable. And Karen, well, Karen's complicity was the ultimate betrayal. She had known about the money funneled into Derek's schemes and said nothing. Instead, she laughed alongside them, perpetuating a cycle of entitlement that had been draining me for years. For the first time, I realized that this wasn't about generosity or family. It was about control. They thought I was powerless, invisible, and compliant. They thought I would bend indefinitely because I had always done so. But the birthday incident, the envelope, the laughter, the public humiliation, had shifted something in me. I started documenting everything, every transfer, every loan, every missed payment or mismanaged venture. I traced Justin's startup finances, Derek's involvement, even small indulgences, designer clothes, gadgets, trips, all of it logged meticulously. For years, I had allowed these transactions to happen without scrutiny. Now, every detail mattered. Every receipt, every contract, every overlooked clause was ammunition. The anger inside me wasn't destructive, it was catalytic. It transformed helplessness into strategy. I wasn't just Justin's ATM, I was the one holding the blueprint of his empire in my hands. The very resources he flaunted, the wealth he squandered, and the life he believed was untouchable were all tied to me. And if he thought a birthday prank could break me, he was wrong. From that night on, I no longer played the role of the silent caretaker. I became the observer, the strategist, and most importantly, the silent force lurking behind the scenes. Every dinner, every gathering, every casual insult was an opportunity to learn, to map weaknesses, and to prepare. Justin and his friends believed they were untouchable. My mother believed her favoritism could shield him. But power, real power, isn't given, it's taken. And that's exactly what I plan to do. I smiled to myself, alone in my office late at night, as I reviewed account after account. Every number, every transfer, every financial decision traced back to me. For years, I had been invisible. For years, I had been mocked and dismissed. But invisible no more. And mocked? That laughter would soon taste very different, because I was no longer the passive enabler. I was becoming the force they had underestimated. 40 candles, an envelope, years of patience, and a mountain of sacrifices. It all led to this moment, the first step in a journey that would change everything. Justin had no idea the storm that was coming. Derek had no idea their empire of entitlement was fragile. And my mother, well, she was about to learn that her golden boy depended on someone she had always overlooked. Christine Hayes had been the silent backbone for too long. Now, she would be the storm. And storms, unlike birthday parties, leave no survivors. The quiet of my office felt like the only safe space in the world. Outside, the party had long since ended, the laughter and chatter replaced by the soft hum of night. But inside, my mind was anything but quiet. Ever since that envelope, that public humiliation, the gears in my brain had been spinning, fast, precise, and unforgiving. It wasn't enough to simply endure Justin's arrogance. That had been my life for decades. I had been the caretaker, the financial manager, the invisible backbone of a family that never saw me, never thanked me, and now had mocked me openly. No, it was time for more. It was time for strategy, for alliances, and for secrets to be weaponized. Karen's betrayal had been the first crack in my mental armor. I discovered, through careful investigation, that she had secretly funneled $50,000 into Derek Walsh's schemes. Money that came from the trust fund I controlled. Every receipt, every bank transfer, every subtle note of approval from me that she had manipulated for her secret advantage. I had traced it all. Karen had thought she was clever, but cleverness, like arrogance, is fragile when someone has been watching for years. I remembered the subtle signs, the extra texts, the late-night calls, the quiet disappearances from family dinners to talk on the phone. At first, I dismissed them as sibling antics, but now, armed with the truth, I realized that she had been part of Justin's ecosystem of entitlement all along, and I had been funding it. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the spreadsheet on my laptop. Each number told a story of betrayal, indulgence, and manipulation. Derek Walsh was no longer just Justin's friend. He was a partner in enabling chaos. Trips, gadgets, stock options in his startup, every detail meticulously logged. I had become the archivist of their irresponsibility, the librarian of their arrogance, and for the first time, it felt like a weapon. I began reaching out cautiously, quietly, to allies who had no reason to side with Justin, Karen, or Derek. Lawyers who had helped me with the trust fund before, accountants who had worked on my father's estate, even distant relatives who had quietly noticed the imbalance of favoritism. I needed information, leverage, and allies who could act without the emotional bias of family loyalty. My first ally was Lydia, a family lawyer Dad had trusted for years. I met her at a quiet cafe, away from prying eyes, under the pretense of updating my own estate plans. I watched her eyes widen as I laid out the details: Justin's reckless spending, Derek's schemes, Karen's secret transfers. "Christine, this is massive," she said softly, almost reverently. "You have more control than they realize." I smiled, a slow, calculated smile. Finally, someone recognized the power I had always held. They think I'm naive, that I don't see the patterns. But the truth is, I've been watching, documenting, and waiting, I said. Now it's time to shift the balance. Next, I contacted a financial auditor Dad had used before he passed. His expertise allowed me to map out every dollar that had flowed through the trust fund over the last 10 years. The results were staggering: misspent funds, hidden investments, and a few accounts that were technically under Justin's name but funded entirely by me. Every mistake, every mismanagement, every hidden transaction became a potential lever for control. But knowledge alone wasn't enough. I had to act strategically. One wrong move, one rash confrontation, and Justin's arrogance would make him immune to reason. He thrived on confrontation, on chaos, on the spectacle. No, I had to be precise, calculated, and invisible until the moment of revelation. Meanwhile, I kept a close eye on Karen. She was clever, but too trusting of the network she thought she controlled. She continued texting Derek, coordinating trips, laughing at jokes I knew were hollow. Little did she know, every move she made was being documented. Every message, every expense, every secret she thought was invisible became part of my arsenal. I also realized that Justin had vulnerabilities beyond finances. His arrogance was fueled by ego, but his pride made him predictable. He underestimated women, especially women like me, who had quietly managed the empire he flaunted. He assumed control came from charm, from charisma, from swagger. He had no idea that the real power had always been in my hands. I started playing a dangerous game, gathering intel under the guise of casual oversight. Every dinner, every family meeting, every conversation was an opportunity. I asked subtle questions, observed body language, and made mental notes. Who supported whom? Who was blind to the chaos? Who could be swayed? Then came the discovery that shifted everything. Derek Walsh had been using company funds for personal indulgences, secretly leveraging Karen's contributions for his own benefit. This wasn't just reckless spending, it was fraud. And with the right evidence, it could dismantle the very structure Justin had built on my money. The possibilities thrilled me. I could expose Derek, confront Karen, and assert control over Justin, all without revealing my own hand too soon. My patience, my years of being overlooked, became a strategic advantage. They had no idea that the person they mocked, dismissed, and betrayed had been preparing for this moment for years. I also began to understand a deeper truth. Family isn't always about love or loyalty. Sometimes it's about survival, about navigating alliances, understanding weaknesses, and knowing when to strike. And if survival meant dismantling the very illusions that Justin and his friends had built, so be it. I kept a journal of every move, every conversation, and every financial anomaly. Each entry became a roadmap, guiding me toward the ultimate goal: reclaiming respect, autonomy, and justice. I didn't want revenge for the sake of cruelty. I wanted balance, fairness, and acknowledgement of the labor and love I had poured into keeping this family afloat. The first tentative steps of my plan were small, subtle, adjustments to financial approvals, quiet inquiries to auditors, probing conversations with allies. Justin remained oblivious, his confidence a dangerous shield. Derek continued to flaunt his friendship as if it were untouchable. Karen smiled in my presence, thinking she was untouchable too. And yet, with every spreadsheet, every account review, every quietly obtained piece of evidence, my power grew. I was no longer just Christine Hayes, the caretaker, the invisible sister, the silent provider. I was Christine Hayes, the strategist, the observer, the storm-gathering strength. I thought about the envelope, the laughter, the public humiliation. That moment was the spark, but now, fueled by information and alliances, the fire became something unstoppable. I knew that patience was my greatest weapon. I would not strike until the moment was perfect, until the evidence was undeniable, and until their arrogance had blinded them completely. At the same time, I allowed myself moments of reflection. The betrayal stung, but it also clarified what mattered: independence, power, and justice. I didn't need validation from Justin, Karen, or even my mother. I needed to reclaim what was rightfully mine: the respect I had earned, the control I had been denied, and the recognition that the backbone of this family was never their flashy lifestyle, but my tireless efforts. The night drew on, and I finally closed my journal. Outside, the world was quiet. The stars blinked overhead, indifferent witnesses to the storm I was preparing. Justin slept peacefully, dreaming of empires built on borrowed power. Derek boasted in his own bubble of entitlement. Karen smiled at illusions she thought were secure. And I smiled too. A smile not of cruelty, but of certainty. I had allies, I had evidence, and I had patience. Most importantly, I had a plan. A plan that would ensure that the golden ATM they had taken for granted would no longer be invisible, no longer ignored, and no longer powerless. The game had changed. Alliances had shifted. Secrets had been revealed. And Christine Hayes was no longer just the caretaker. She was the storm that would bring the house of arrogance crashing down. The calm before the storm isn't quiet. It hums with anticipation, patience, and calculation. I had spent years as the invisible backbone of my family, paying for Justin's extravagance, smoothing over conflicts, and being dismissed at every turn. But now, I was no longer invisible. The birthday humiliation, the betrayal by Karen, the endless arrogance of Justin and Derek, it had all been transformed into a weapon, and I was ready to strike. I began with precision. The first step was subtle, almost imperceptible. Small adjustments in the trust fund, minute reallocations, carefully worded communications with our family accountant. Nothing that screamed retaliation, nothing that would immediately alert Justin or Karen. But every change set the stage, creating ripples they could not yet perceive. Justin remained blissfully unaware. He continued to flaunt his lifestyle, confident in the illusion of untouchability. Derek strutted alongside him, mocking every minor frustration with exaggerated laughter. And Karen, the so-called responsible sibling, continued to play the role of loyal sister, never suspecting that her complicity in Derek's schemes had made her just as vulnerable as the others. My first public maneuver came in the form of a family dinner, innocuous on the surface, but orchestrated with meticulous care. I knew that power moves required a stage, and the dining room became mine. As conversations flowed, I casually mentioned a review of the trust fund, phrasing it as a matter of routine oversight. Justin scoffed, rolling his eyes as if the suggestion was beneath him. But beneath my calm tone, the gears were turning. I had identified a series of poorly documented investments, loans Derek had taken out, business expenses filed incorrectly, and Karen's secret $50,000 contribution to Derek's personal ventures. Each one was a thread waiting to unravel the fabric of Justin's confidence. I didn't strike immediately. Patience was essential. Instead, I gathered all the evidence discreetly, compiling spreadsheets, PDFs, and bank statements into a master file. Every misstep, every misuse of funds, every overlooked clause became part of a growing arsenal. I even started reaching out to a few of Justin's business partners, carefully asking questions under the guise of casual curiosity. Each response added another layer to the map I was building, a map of their weaknesses, their blind spots, their overconfidence. Meanwhile, I began reclaiming control over other aspects of the family empire. The house, the cars, even minor investments that Justin assumed were entirely under his management, all were subtly restructured under my authority. I watched his eyes widen ever so slightly during casual mentions of changes I had quietly implemented. He didn't know yet that his golden life had cracks so deep he couldn't see them until it was too late. At the same time, I cultivated alliances. Lydia, the family lawyer, was invaluable. She had seen the patterns in Justin's spending, understood the intricacies of the trust fund, and respected the meticulous care I had taken to document everything. My auditor friend, equally astounded by Derek's financial improprieties, began building reports that could be used to formally challenge his actions. Every ally became a silent partner in my plan, a reinforcement of the storm I was gathering. I also played psychological games. Justin and Derek thrived on ego, arrogance, and performance. I began strategically questioning them in private conversations, planting seeds of doubt without revealing my hand. Casual remarks about responsibility, subtle inquiries about investments, even pointed suggestions about the longevity of Derek's startup, all were calculated to make them question their own competence. Slowly, I watched cracks appear in their carefully constructed bubble. Justin's confidence wavered in moments I could barely disguise my satisfaction. Karen, on the other hand, remained blissfully unaware. I had her complicit funds documented, her missteps logged, and her hidden transfers accounted for. I even began leaving subtle hints of oversight, enough to make her nervous, but not enough to make her suspicious. Fear, carefully applied, is a far more powerful motivator than anger. She would learn the truth soon enough. One evening, I orchestrated a subtle confrontation with Derek. It was an innocuous dinner, a casual chat under the pretense of family bonding. I asked pointed questions about his startup, nudged him about accounting discrepancies, and observed his reactions. He laughed nervously, deflecting with charm, but the cracks were visible. He underestimated me. He assumed I would continue to be the passive caretaker, the golden ATM, the invisible enabler. He was wrong. The next step was financial leverage. With the detailed records I had compiled, I began reallocating funds in a way that did not immediately alert Justin, but subtly restricted his access to his usual luxuries. A car lease delayed, a startup payment adjusted, a minor investment paused, small moves that, when combined, created unease and forced attention to the structures I controlled. The first stirrings of panic were already visible in his mannerisms. He began questioning his usual freedoms, asking Derek for advice, and even glancing at me with suspicion he didn't understand. And yet, I remained calm. I had no desire for immediate confrontation. This was a chess game, not a battle of impulsive moves. Every action was calculated, deliberate, and designed to maximize impact. Justin and Derek were unwitting pieces on my board, their arrogance blinding them to the patterns I was creating. I also took steps to protect myself. Every email, every communication, every financial adjustment was carefully documented. I anticipated countermoves, hidden manipulations, even potential betrayals from Karen or others I hadn't yet identified. The storm I was building required precision, foresight, and preparation. Then came the moment of quiet triumph. Subtle acknowledgement from allies. Lydia sent me a message after a meeting. "You're doing what most wouldn't even see coming. Keep pushing, but carefully." My auditor friend confirmed that Derek's mismanagement could be legally challenged if necessary. The threads were coming together. The web of control, deception, and entitlement was now mine to command. I knew the final moves would need to be dramatic. Justin and Derek's arrogance demanded spectacle. But for now, patience and subtlety were my allies. The thrill was in watching them stumble unknowingly, in seeing the first signs of unease ripple through their carefully curated world. I also began reclaiming my self-respect in other ways. I spent time on projects I had long neglected, allowed myself small pleasures, and even began speaking up at family gatherings with calm authority. My presence, once invisible, now carried weight. People noticed. Even my mother, who had always dismissed me, began glancing at me differently, curiously, cautiously. By the end of the chapter of quiet maneuvering, I had achieved something critical. The narrative was shifting. Justin, Derek, and Karen no longer held all the power. The illusion of control, long assumed to be theirs, was now being dismantled silently, invisibly, by the one person they had mocked the most. The birthday humiliation, the years of invisible labor, the silent sacrifices, they had all led to this moment. The first moves of my power play were complete, the foundation for my ultimate revenge, laid with meticulous care. And as I sat in my office late at night, reviewing spreadsheets, emails, and notes, I allowed myself a small, victorious smile. Christine Hayes was no longer just the invisible caretaker. She was the strategist, the observer, the storm. And when the time came, the storm would strike with precision, leaving no corner of Justin and Derek's world untouched. For now, the power moves were subtle, calculated, and almost invisible. But soon, very soon, the full force of Christine Hayes would make its presence unmistakable. The calm before the storm is one thing, but the storm itself? The storm is deliberate, precise, and unstoppable. I had spent decades as the invisible backbone of my family, funding Justin's extravagance, smoothing over Derek's antics, and covering for Karen's complicity. But the birthday humiliation, the betrayals, the arrogance, it all came together now, fueling a plan that had been years in the making. The day began like any other, but I had orchestrated it with meticulous care. Every move, every person, every conversation had been carefully calculated. Justin was oblivious, Karen smug in her assumed invulnerability, and Derek still acting as if his friendship and charm made him untouchable. All of them were blind to the storm gathering behind my quiet composure. I started with Derek. The audit reports, meticulously compiled over months, revealed financial mismanagement, fraud, and personal expenditures he had disguised as business expenses. I had copies of every transaction, every email, every forged approval, ready to be unveiled. I scheduled a casual meeting at my office, ostensibly to discuss family finances. Derek arrived, grinning, confident, unaware that he was walking into the first trap. I offered him tea, smiled warmly, and then laid out the documents in front of him. At first, he laughed, thinking it was a mistake. "This can't be serious, Christine," he said, waving a hand dismissively. But the data didn't lie. The evidence was overwhelming. His laughter faltered. Panic seeped into his confident veneer. "You've been manipulating funds, Derek, using Karen's contributions for personal gain. Misusing the trust fund I manage. Fraud," I said, my voice calm but sharp. "And I have documented proof of every single transaction." The color drained from his face. He tried to argue, to charm his way out, but I had anticipated every counter. Every excuse, every deflection had been mapped in advance. I could see the fear now, raw and unpolished, as the reality of his missteps hit him. Next came Karen. She had assumed that her secret contributions, her complicity in Derek's schemes, would remain hidden. She hadn't considered that I had every bank statement, every transfer, every whispered conversation logged and verified. I confronted her privately, showing her the evidence. Her eyes widened, her smug confidence crumbling. "Karen," I said softly, "every move you've made has been accounted for. Every dollar, every secret, every lie." She stammered, searching for an excuse, but none could save her. The betrayal she had hidden for so long was now exposed, and she had no one to blame but herself. Then came Justin, the epicenter of arrogance, entitlement, and ignorance. I had saved him for last, allowing the tension to build, letting him assume control still belonged to him. I arranged a family meeting under the pretense of clarifying finances and discussing the future. Every member present, every ally positioned strategically, every document ready for revelation. As we sat in the living room, Justin began his usual performance: charm, bravado, a casual smirk that assumed invincibility. But I had changed the narrative. I didn't confront him with anger, I didn't shout or demand. I revealed the truth piece by piece, letting the evidence speak. Derek's fraud, Karen's secret contributions, mismanaged funds, hidden transfers, all laid bare. Justin's expression shifted from smug confidence to disbelief. Every denial he tried to offer was countered with proof, meticulously documented and irrefutable. He sputtered, struggled for words, tried to charm and manipulate, but the tide had turned. The very empire he had flaunted as his own was revealed to be built on my labor, oversight, and patience. The family watched in stunned silence. My mother, Patricia Hayes, whose favoritism had shielded Justin for years, finally saw the cracks she had ignored. Her expression faltered, her smile faded. The golden boy she had protected, the perfect son in her eyes, was exposed not as a hero, but as a reckless, entitled man who had taken advantage of every ounce of trust placed in him. I remained calm, composed, the storm in control. The humiliation I had once felt on my 40th birthday, the envelope, the laughter, the cruel joke, was now reversed. Justin's arrogance was exposed, Derek's schemes laid bare, Karen's complicity undeniable. Every sneer, every jab, every moment I had endured was now a tool, a weapon that had turned the tables entirely. And yet, it wasn't about cruelty. It was about justice, recognition, and power. I had reclaimed my dignity, my authority, and the respect I had always deserved. The family had underestimated me for decades, and now they had no choice but to acknowledge it. The final act came with strategic control of the trust fund. Every mismanaged dollar was corrected, every loophole secured, and every future allocation placed under careful oversight. Justin could no longer use the inheritance as his personal playground. Derek had no leverage, no charm, no excuse. Karen had learned the cost of secret complicity. By the evening, the storm had settled. Justin, Derek, and Karen were silent, subdued, humbled in ways that words could not fully capture. The family had witnessed a shift in power, a recalibration that could not be undone. I stood, calm, measured, victorious. Christine Hayes, the invisible caretaker, the silent enabler, the overlooked sibling, was no more. In her place stood Christine Hayes, the strategist, the storm, the force that had reshaped the family dynamics forever. I thought back to that cruel envelope, the laughter, the public humiliation. That moment had sparked the fire, but the fire had transformed into a storm of precision, patience, and calculated action. What they had seen as weakness had been strategy. What they had mocked as passivity had been observation. What they had assumed to be invisibility had been preparation. And now, as the family sat in stunned acknowledgement, I allowed myself a small, satisfied smile. Revenge had been served, not with rage, but with calculated justice. Every move had been deliberate, every detail anticipated, every outcome controlled. For the first time in decades, I felt true power, Not the borrowed or assumed power of wealth or charm, but the unassailable power of knowledge, strategy, and patience. Justin, Derek, and Karen had learned the ultimate lesson: underestimate Christine Hayes at your peril. And as I looked around at the stunned faces of my family, I realized something even more profound. Victory isn't just about proving others wrong, it's about reclaiming yourself. And in that moment, with the storm finally having passed, I reclaimed Christine Hayes entirely. The legacy of years of sacrifice, humiliation, and patience had culminated in this. A clear, undeniable assertion of who I truly was. Not just the caretaker, not just the enabler, not just the sister they had mocked and dismissed. I was the storm. I was the force. And I had arrived. The chapter of humiliation was over. The chapter of power had begun. And Christine Hayes, at last, had earned her place. Undeniable, unstoppable, and unforgettable.